The viral 1826 melody that ignited the piano phenomenon by Piano Curio 2 months ago. Okay.
On May 2nd, 1882, in this very room, a crowd of piano students gathered for a masterclass taught by Franz Liszt. At the piano on this occasion was a young lady making a doomed attempt at playing La Campanella, a frightfully difficult piano study with daring leaps in the right hand. The piece was all the more challenging as she played it right in front of the pianist who had composed it 3 decades earlier. Liszt had long ago retreated from his storied career as a touring virtuoso.
But at the same time, from what I understand, a lot of composers compose stuff that they couldn't play themselves, right? So maybe it's not that embarrassing to not be able to play it.
And later an eminent composer of modern music. Since then, he spent much of his time teaching group classes to international pianists, all of whom hoped to acquire the sought-after title of Liszt pupil. One such pupil was the American Carl Lockmund, who recorded what happened next. Over and over again, the student tried to correct her mistakes as Liszt urged her to repeat the measure. But as her nerves skyrocketed, her confidence plummeted. Finally, when Liszt's patience ran out, he took over at the piano to demonstrate.
Okay.
At 70 years old, he played the opening page of La Campanella without missing a note or showing the least bit of effort. In fact, he looked away from the piano as his hands flew from one key to another.
That's cool. Having this kind of motor skill at 70 is something.
A note in a later passage, he immediately repeated it, making the same error on purpose.
Was a beast of musician and composer. If there's one musician you could say is built different, Liszt would probably be the most fitting.
Liszt then explained just how he had done it. When I have the will to do, I can do. But when that will is lacking, I cannot do more than the ordinary.
Mr. Anime. Okay. Just believe.
Well, easy enough for him to say, but as he reached the last page of the etude, Liszt turned reflective about the rapid octave accompaniment in the left hand. It may be simplified, he conceded, as if apologizing for its difficulty. When I wrote that, I did not teach so much as I do now. Little did these students know the great difficulties Liszt himself had gone through to create this iconic showpiece. It was well known that La Campanella originated a half-century earlier with the great violinist Paganini, but Liszt had written more than a few very different arrangements of this theme. There was a mostly forgotten fantasy from the early 1830s, another couple of those from 1845, and a shorter study from 1838 that Liszt had actively suppressed from the public. This left only a final attempt from 1851, the piece that later generations would come to know as the definitive piano version of La Campanella. And that's not to mention all the versions that preceded Liszt's. Variations, rondos, fantasies, all by celebrity pianists of the 1820s and 30s, but most of these had long since fallen through the cracks of history. What was it that caused so many composers to adapt this once viral melody? And why is Liszt's version the only one anybody plays today?
Paganini, Liszt, La Campanella.
It all started long before one night in Vienna.
Vienna. Grand concert.
"45-year-old Paganini was already a violin legend when he
Austrian
first
Empire.
toured outside Italy, making his Viennese debut in the spring of 1828. The hall filled with eager concert-goers 3 hours in advance of the downbeat. Most of the audience stood, some on chairs, just to catch a glimpse of his entry. When Paganini finally walked on stage, his gaunt figure dressed in old-fashioned black clothes, the audience erupted. As soon as his bow touched the strings, he became possessed by the music.
That's a cool visual.
His technical mastery sounded
Record of classical
unbelievable to the
music,
Viennese.
I see.
But it wasn't just his technique. Paganini was a true showman. One of his calling cards was to play an entire piece on a single string, as if to prove he didn't need the other three. Paganini turned otherwise conventional tunes into overnight sensations. There was the rondo finale from his first violin concerto. And in 1829, the Carnival of Venice variations, based on a Neapolitan melody. But none of Paganini's melodies was more striking to the Viennese than La Campanella, or The Little Bell, the title he gave to the finale of his second violin concerto. It contained a novel effect, though some called it a gimmick, a chiming bell. The violin responded to the bell with its own ring, imitated through high-pitched harmonics.
Interesting.
It had all the qualities of a hit: novelty, virtuosity, and irresistible catchiness.
It sounds really
Everyone
great.
in Vienna turned out to hear Paganini play. Franz Schubert, who only had a few months left to live, attended 2 of his 14 recitals, each time shelling out up to 5 florins, more than a week's pay for the average workman. But the mania also spread beyond the concert hall. The violinist's portrait appeared on chocolates and cakes. Hats a la Paganini flew off the shelves. Ladies wore their hair after Paganini. Even a Paganini-inspired farce was staged at a local theater, in which a violinist named Celebrini plays so enchantingly that hundreds of astounded audience members must have their mouths surgically shut again. Other musicians soon realized they could piggyback on Paganini's success, sampling his material to create trendy hits of their own. That same
That's how
year,
it goes in
one
music, yeah.
up-and-coming Viennese composer thought that La Campanella would make for the perfect waltz. His name was Johann Strauss.
I know that name, no?
On the other side of Vienna, a very different version of La Campanella was taking shape. A set of variations for piano duet featuring 20 minutes of brilliant passage work. This rare featuring
Grande variation brillante pour le pianoforte à 4 mains sur le thème original favori de La Campanella. That's a mouthful.
20 minutes of brilliant
That's a mouthful.
passage work. This rarely known version of La Campanella came from the icon of the brilliant style himself, Carl Czerny. A former Beethoven pupil, Czerny was a respected pianist and teacher in Vienna, where several years before he had taught a young prodigy named Franz Liszt, but more on him later. Czerny created the first virtuosic piano arrangement of La Campanella, from fast variations in sixteenths to gracious andantes. And at the end, a thrilling finale.
That's nice.
these adaptations were only the beginning as the Paganini craze swept across Europe. La Campanella was transcribed for guitar.
Oh, that's a vibe.
In Copenhagen and Paris, it appeared as brilliant rondos for piano. Music shops began selling Paganini-inspired medleys called souvenirs, many of them written by famous pianists, and nearly all of them featuring the iconic bell rondo.
That really became a phenomenon. Intense.
But what all of these arrangements lacked was what made Paganini Paganini. It wasn't just what he played, but how he played it. It would take a musician not just with transcendent technique, but with a singular persona himself to truly adapt Paganini's virtuosity to the piano.
It's so fast. Huh?
What a man, what a violin, what an artist. 20-year-old Franz Liszt scrawled these words in a...
René, quel homme, quel violon, quel artiste. Rien que de souffrance, de misère, de torture dans ces 4 cordes. I mean, I don't need to translate the whole thing, but it's so ultra dramatic. Yeah, that's one hell of a review.
A fit of madness after hearing Paganini perform in 1832. Clearly overwhelmed, Liszt jotted down a few of his musical tricks. This was a turning point in Liszt's career. Since studying with Czerny in 1822 and going on tour the next year, he had spent his late teens living with his mother in Paris, teaching talentless piano students over long days, and considering retiring from music altogether to become a monk. But the violinist's concert jolted Liszt toward a new purpose: to do for the piano what Paganini had done for the violin. That's when Liszt set out on one of the most experimental works of his career, the Clochette Fantasy. In this fantasy, Liszt treated La Campanella not as a popular melody, but as a canvas for grotesque effects.
Grotesque. That doesn't sound very grotesque. This is kind of chill. Not chill anymore.
At the heart of the fantasy was a variation a la Paganini, where Liszt invoked the sheer physicality of the violinist's performances. The score was infested not just with the notes themselves, but with ornaments, leaps, dynamics, and the most minute expression markings. It wasn't the end of his obsession with La Campanella. Every several years, he would return to that same melody, testing it out in a new form or a different texture. In 1838, the beginning of Liszt's touring virtuoso period, La Campanella was part of his 6 Paganini etudes. These studies were intended as uncompromising adaptations of Paganini's virtuosity for the piano, but the results were mixed. La Campanella is featured in the 3rd study of the set, but it mostly disappears after the first 2 pages, giving way to another popular theme from Paganini's 1st concerto. But in that space, Liszt does little more than add some cosmetic details over the melody. To be fair, he did spice up these bland pickup notes by adding some falling chromatic thirds, an addition that would stick in later versions.
Whatever that means. Perfect version, yeah. Fair enough.
Just 2 years after
They all sound great to me. I can't really tell which one is better.
Was dead. Liszt wrote an article in Memorial explaining that while he was a great performer, his playing was too egoistic and shallow. For Liszt, the virtuoso had a duty to serve audiences with technical feats that were justified by their musical ends. This was big talk from a 28-year-old who had definitely played a lot of shallow music himself, but it nonetheless tells us about his attitude as he toyed with the Campanella theme further. From then on, Liszt wouldn't settle for mere technical fireworks, but only with a musically satisfying result, and he was getting closer by the year. Throughout the 1830s and 40s, Liszt performed in some 260 towns and cities. His mind, fingers, and pen grew sharper as he learned what worked in front of an audience and what didn't. One of his most successful showpieces was the Grand Chromatic Gallop, especially its leaping passage in the brilliant style, where the right hand rapidly traverses an ever-widening gap. It's no surprise that Czerny, who first taught Liszt in the brilliant style of playing, had written many similar passages before, such as this one from his 10th piano sonata. That same year, the leaping figure even made a brief appearance in Henri Hertz's Rondo on La Campanella.
Speed, speed, speed.
Liszt had also used it sparingly in his first etude on La Campanella, though it wasn't part of the bell theme itself. And of course, difficult leaps of this kind also formed a big part of Paganini's repertoire. Clearly, this leaping figure was common currency among virtuosos, and by the mid-1840s, Liszt began blending it into his latest improvisations on La Campanella.
He's getting down.
This passage comes from one of Liszt's abandoned concert works with some recycled materials from the earlier clochette fantasy. It's the closest he'd gotten yet to that iconic version we know today. Around 1851, Liszt finally sat down to revise all 6 of his Paganini studies from 1838. His touring years were then behind him. Nearly 20 years had passed since he first heard Paganini play, and this time he wrote the version of La Campanella the world would never forget. Saving bits and pieces from his previous attempts, Liszt decided to try something new. This time he would focus solely on La Campanella, without any contrasting themes or episodes. He crossed out the dynamics of the opening octaves, marking them piano instead of forte, where the dynamic level would more or less remain for the next 11 pages. Then he wrote that iconic phrase, suspended in the piano's uppermost range. What could be more bell-like?
Beautiful. Speed.
The momentum never flags thanks to Liszt's constant invention of new variations, plus a central cadenza with sparkling runs at the top end of the piano.
It looks crazy to see it on sheet music. Every dot. It sounds like when in game they tell you to like spam a key, you know. It feels like that to me.
After nearly a dozen pages of subdued dynamics, the floodgates open into a storm of fortissimo octaves.
It's definitely a very recognizable melody.
This version was Liszt's
Wow.
best yet. He even demanded that his publisher take the 1838 Paganini studies out of print, personally buying out all of the plates and copies to make way for the revised edition. While it's commonly thought that Liszt simply rewrote his Paganini studies to make them more playable, it's clear that his changes to La Campanella were more than that. He composed better music out of it. Its texture was lean but imaginative, highly evocative of its namesake bell, and it carried momentum through its dramatic closing bars. The same could not be said about any of the previous versions. And beyond its musicality, the piece's focus on leaping passages made it genuinely useful as a technical study, one that has confounded pianists for generations. This was a true concert study, instructive in the practice room and thrilling in the performance hall. After the Paganini craze died down and the world forgot its once fashionable byproducts, the souvenirs, the rondos, the hats, Liszt's La Campanella endured. Today, it's a staple of the repertoire and a dream piece, or a nightmare piece, for many young pianists. Liszt spent almost 20 years getting it right. At least 4 written attempts, countless improvisations, his obsession with Paganini outlasted the public mania by decades.
That's
The
awesome.
result was a rare piece that captured what made Paganini unforgettable in the first place. Not just catchy tunes or technical brilliance, but a spectacle so compelling that people couldn't help but stop and watch.
The speed. Alright. What a story. What a story. Mega interesting. Just the obsession that he got over listening to the original and wanting to adapt it to piano. That's really awesome to see and an awesome story. Obviously, I don't really follow or understand all the technical aspects of it, but respect once again. Definitely heard this melody, this song before. I'm sure it's been used in a lot of movies and a lot of popular media, I would say. It's mighty impressive, no doubt. Great story, great artist. Amazing video. Learned a lot. So yeah, I guess tomorrow we're gonna check out a cover of that, I assume. It should be interesting. It should be interesting to see the very least. Great video,